He was less than 3 years old. This Palestinian child was shot to death by an Israeli soldier in Nabi Saleh on June 1st.
Zionists deliberately sabotaged the instinctive reaction of Jews everywhere to boycott Nazi Germany, because it grew up spontaneously, this boycott. You know, I mean, the first thing that happened when Hitler came to power is Jews resolved not to buy German goods. And then to extend that to a campaign to get others to not to buy German goods. The Zionists at that time, before Haberer, were already vehemently opposed to it.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to the Struggle Video News. This is how Mohammed Tamimi spent his last moments of life. He was less than 3 years old. This Palestinian child was shot to death by an Israeli soldier in Nabi Saleh on June 1st. The child's father, who was also shot, said he left his home, put the toddler in his car, and then the two were shot. The Israeli army claims that its snipers were just returning fire from Palestinians. Their story is almost certainly a lie. What father would have taken out his child in the midst of a gun battle? The Israeli army says the incident is under study. The cynical Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL welcomes this review, knowing full well that these Israeli military investigations usually go on for years and then stop with no results at all. Note that the Israeli Haaretz columnist Gideon Levy has written 3 excellent articles about the killing, the latest noting how the Israeli media has either buried this story or ignored it completely. Also in Haaretz, this article by Amira Haas, the headline, Israel stops Gazan from getting treatment in Jordan to save his leg from being amputated. The subheadline, the Israeli army rejected H's request in light of classified intelligence that suggests he has ties to terrorist operatives. Concluding that traveling to Jordan isn't possible, H has made arrangement to have his leg amputated in Gaza next week. Realize he's willing to put himself into Israeli hands as he goes to and from Jordan. He could be treated, and then the Israelis could put him in prison. But the Israelis aren't responding. They do not care. This level of cruelty may seem unbelievable, but realize every year people from Gaza die because the Israeli government refuses them permission to leave for proper medical treatment. In March of 22, Fatima al-Masri died in a Gaza hospital of a heart defect. Her family spent 5 months making fruitless requests of Israeli officials whose own hearts must be made of stone. This is the headline to a major article in Haaretz. A key advisor to the head of the Israeli National Security Minister is actually facing trial for racism and incitement. Not a problem for Netanyahu's religious Zionist government. His name is Benzi Gopstein, and he is advisor to Itamar Ben-Gvir. And according to the article, he has lots to say about police appointments and other matters. Gopstein was arrested by the Israeli police in 1990, accused of murdering 2 Palestinians. The case was dropped for lack of evidence. According to the article, he was filmed in 2015 dancing at an infamous wedding where attendees, some wearing T-shirts of the banned racist Kach movement, waving knives and weapons, were singing and dancing to a song that glorified taking revenge against Palestinians. Guests at the wedding stabbed and burnt photographs of Ali Dawabsha, the Palestinian infant killed along with his parents in an arson murder attack perpetrated by far-right Jewish extremists. This week there was a Zoom made up of over 200 people representing groups opposed to Israeli apartheid. They all agreed to this pledge. The main organizer of the event was the Christian Palestinian group Sabeel. You can reach Friends of Sabeel North America at this email, friends@fasna.org. Last week we reported on Fatima Mohammed, the law school graduate at the City University of New York, CUNY. She had been chosen by her fellow students to give the commencement address. In it, she blasted harshly and deservedly the state of Israel. The trustees of CUNY then said her address was a hate speech. Responding, over 36 CUNY law professors sent a letter to their board saying there was nothing at all hateful about the speech, and the Jewish Law Students Association at CUNY denied the speech was anti-Semitic. And this is a statement supporting Fatima Mohammed by Jewish Voice for Peace. This is New York City on June 7th, covered in smoke from Canadian wildfires. The video is on the Twitter feed of climate activist Mike Hudima. Hudima writes, "In the last 4 years, each city had its worst day of wildfire smoke in recorded history. New York, 2023, San Francisco, 2020, Los Angeles, 2024, Sydney, 2019. The earth is on fire. There is no time to wait. Act on climate." On Democracy Now!, New York Times science writer David Wallace Wells said that the amount of forest being burned is 14 times the recent average. So here on the East Coast, we can get a taste of climate destruction. And I mean that literally. We can taste the destruction in the air. That brings us to Connecticut and its legislature. These headlines sum it up. Not much interest in Connecticut in doing anything about the climate. The legislature did have a big interest: taxes, cutting taxes. They cut taxes by $460 million, permanently cutting back on funds that could be helping the public in general, in favor of more private consumption, more buying, more goods, more plastic, etc., etc. Oh, they did pass one measure which they say will help the climate. They set up a council to study the expansion of nuclear power. 35,000 dead from Chernobyl in Ukraine, Zaporizhia nuclear power plants that could go up at any time. And the wise heads of Connecticut want to expand the number of nuclear power plants. These are stills upriver from the breached dam at the Dnipro River in Ukraine. The destruction of the Kakhova Dam has left behind vast quantities of beached fish, contributing to fears of an environmental disaster along the country's Dnipro River. Vast quantities of fish died for nothing, and their decaying carcasses will carry disease. Another crime added to Putin's long list. From climate hero Greta Thunberg, this ecocide as a continuation of Russia's unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine is yet another atrocity which leaves the world lost for words. Our eyes are once again on Russia, who must be held accountable for their crimes. Now more of my interview with British anti-Zionist activist Tony Greenstein. We talk about his book, Zionism During the Holocaust. You can see some things in their writings where they saw Hitler's rise as a, quote, opportunity, unquote.
Well, yes. I mean, Ben-Gurion was rubbing his hands with glee at the golden opportunity the rise of the Nazis produced. Noah Lucas, I quote, at the beginning of one of the chapters, who says exactly that amidst the chaos and carnage of Hitler's Europe, Ben-Gurion saw only opportunity, because it was only in those circumstances that Zionism could triumph. If Jewish communities were left unmolested to develop and grow naturally, Zionism, with its strange ideas that all Jews should go to Palestine and congregate there, didn't appeal to them. And you can actually see that in a book which I'm rereading at the moment by Anne Frank, her own diary, when she considers Zionists to be quite strange creatures. I mean, she was only a 15-year-old girl, but to her, she wanted to live in the free Holland, Netherlands after the war. She didn't have any ideas of emigrating to Palestine and separating herself off. She wanted to be part of a rich European culture. And that was true of most Jews, of course. And the Zionists derided them for that, because they had no national consciousness in their view.
And then the Zionists, who in Germany represented, as you say, only 2% of the population, go and make this deal, the agreement to transfer wealth and people, mainly wealth probably, to their project in Palestine, the transfer agreement.
Well, that's right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Today, it's portrayed as a life-saving measure, that the primary purpose was to save German Jews. I mean, that is just an outright lie. For a start, it only saved 20,000, and they were the richest, the best off. I mean, not all German Jews had £1,000 in cash, which today is the equivalent of £90,000, and whatever the equivalent in dollars would be. In addition to the amounts of money needed to purchase heavy machinery, equipment, and so on in Germany for export to Palestine. So it saved the very Jews who would have had no difficulty getting admission overseas. What it didn't do was aid the poor German Jews, the elderly, the frail, the weak, those without resources. It had no effect whatsoever. And in any case, it saved 20,000 out of the 50-odd thousand who went to Palestine. So by any stretch of the imagination, it was a failure. But why did the Nazis adopt it? Because they saw it was the means of overcoming and destroying the boycott. The Zionists deliberately sabotaged the instinctive reaction of Jews everywhere to boycott Nazi Germany, because it grew up spontaneously, this boycott. You know, I mean, the first thing that happened when Hitler came to power is Jews resolved not to buy German goods, and then to extend that to a campaign to get others to not to buy German goods. The Zionists at that time, before Haberer, were already vehemently opposed to it, because it was un-Zionist. Zionism wants to do business. It doesn't want to oppose anti-Semitism. So they looked for an opportunity as to how they could benefit their own project. And that's not just me saying that now. That was what the pro-Zionist Jewish Chronicle was saying, and others. I mean, it was the bourgeois Jews together with the Zionists who opposed it. And we should remember that now.
So as the 30s go on and Hitler becomes more and more extreme, people recognize this is a menace. What about the famous Kinder transport to your country, where they brought children, German Jewish children to Britain? Was that a Zionist idea?
Quite the contrary. The idea was of the British Jewish bourgeoisie and the Board of Deputies, which at that time was not controlled by the Zionists. I mean, they put to the British government, which surprisingly accepted it, that 10,000 German Jewish children, but not their parents, of course, could emigrate to Britain. The Zionists threw up their hands in horror. And Ben Gurion made that famous statement, which I reprint in my book, but is why, I mean, no one denies that it's genuine. No one, because everyone knows that's exactly what he said. It's reprinted in Shabtai Tebeth's biography of him, and Tebeth is a hagiographer more than a biographer. That if given the choice between saving half Germans, Jewish children in England, and all of in Palestine rather, and all of them in England, he would prefer the former, because you've got to think of the survival of our people, not just these children. You know, and Chaim Weizmann was even more adamant. I mean, he had this row with Malcolm MacDonald, the colonial secretary, and which he basically said, I mean, we will fight you again over this. But the Zionists couldn't, because the Board of Deputies hadn't yet been captured by the Zionists. And I make the point, if they had won it 2 years earlier, then those 10,000 children would probably have died too.
So the Nazis take over Poland and other countries in the East, and they set up Judenrat. What was that? And how did the Zionist leadership oppose or support the Judenrat?
Well, the Judenrat were established in most Polish ghettos. And they were an instrument of the Nazis. And they were composed largely of the existing Jewish leadership. What can you say about them? I mean, the Zionists today make all sorts of apologies. They had no choice. They were compelled, and so on and so forth. But I go into these debates in some detail and basically say that even though they did fulfill certain welfare functions, soup kitchens, and so on, even their best works were still part of the Nazi design. They were an instrument in the hands of the Nazis to expedite the massacre and the extermination of the Jews. Of course, in the areas of the Soviet Union, which the German army had invaded, the Einsatzgruppen generally did not set up ghettos. They simply wiped out everyone they could. And that was to a large extent true in the Baltic republics. But wherever they did have these ghettos, and they used them for labor, part of the German armaments industry and so on, they established Judenrats, and 2/3 of them were composed of Zionists. I mean,
and these groups actually helped select people for deportation or cooperated?
Yes, I mean, the Nazis would give them a figure of Jews they wanted for deportation, and they were the ones who did the selection. Not only the selection, but the rounding up, even when it was known where the destination of deportation was going at in Warsaw. So in Warsaw, the Judenrat and who sent the Jewish police into, because the Nazis generally didn't do the roundups. It was the Jewish police who did the roundups. And it wasn't simply grabbing anyone they could see. I mean, they conscientiously went about their tasks. So in Warsaw, I mean, they would dig up and expose well-hidden dugouts where people could survive. So they were absolutely thorough in this. And this was carried out, I say, by Jewish police, who were mainly Zionists, of course. In Warsaw, it was the revisionists. The revisionists tended to form the largest part of the Jewish police everywhere. But today, I mean, the Zionists were aghast, and they were at the time of Hannah Arendt when she brought out a book, Eichmann in Jerusalem. She said, if there'd been no Jewish leadership, far more Jews would have survived. And this was met by mass outrage and horror. Gideon Hausner, the prosecutor at the Eichmann trial, laid into her and Raoul Hilberg, who he said were responsible for this cruel, unkind attitude to those who had betrayed the Jewish masses. But we only need to take our lead from the Jewish masses, who everywhere hated the Judenrat. I mean, the Zionists may love them, but the masses of the ghettos, which is where we should take our lead from, they absolutely hated them, Rinkowski and all the rest of them. But it's no surprise, because the Zionists provided, Isaiah Trunk did a survey of those who survived. 2/3 of them were Zionists. So, I mean, that's why, and some leading collaborators after the war became leaders again of their own Jewish communities. I mean, that was reality.
How about the Zionist leaders in Palestine? Did they make rescue of Jews their number one priority? I seem to be making you amused again. One would think that once they knew what was going on, they would shelve other activities and go 24/7 to try to help Jews in Europe.
Well, you might think so, but sadly that isn't the case. Can I bring up this document? It's from Boaz Evren. It's a book which is, I quote in my own book, The Jewish People or the Jewish Holocaust or an Israeli Nation, I think it's called. And you'll see page 260, there's a long footnote, number 3. And this is about the Evian conference. For those who don't understand what Evian was, Evian, in 1938, Roosevelt called a conference concerning the Jewish refugee camp problem, which was held in the French spa town of Evian. And nations were invited, states were invited on the basis that they didn't actually have to change their existing policy. So it was a face-saving exercise. But the Zionists, nonetheless, were extremely worried about it. And Evian says, and you can see this in front of you, here is a quotation from a letter by George Landor, who was in charge of the settlement of German Jews for the Zionists, to Stephen Weiss, who was the leader of the American Zionists, dated February the 13th, 1938. The conference itself was held in July. And he said, I am writing this letter at the request of Dr. Weizmann, who became the first Israeli president and was a long-time leader of the Zionist organization, because we're extremely concerned lest the problem, this is the problem of refugees, be presented in a way which could prejudice the activity for Eretz Yisrael, that is Palestine. Even if the conference does not propose immediately after its opening other countries, but Eretz Yisrael as venues for Jewish emigration, it will certainly arouse a public response that could put the importance of Eretz Yisrael, that's Palestine, in the shade, Jewish Palestine, of course. We are particularly worried that it would move Jewish organizations to collect large sums of money for aid to Jewish refugees, and these collections could interfere with our collection efforts. And then there's another statement by Menachem Asishkin, who was a leading Russian Zionist, who knew Herzl, in the meeting of the Jewish Agency's executive on the 26th of June, 1938. So it's just before the conference starts. He says, he is highly concerned at the Evian conference. Mr. Greenbaum is right in stating that there is a danger that Jewish people also will take Eretz Yisrael off its agenda. and this should be viewed by us as a terrible danger. He hoped to hear in Evian that Eretz Yisrael remains the main venue for Jewish emigration. All other emigration countries do not interest him. The greatest danger is that attempts will be made to find other territories for Jewish emigration. And the account of Ben-Gurion's statements at the same meeting, no rationalization, quote, can turn the conference from a harmful to a useful one. What can and should be done is to limit the damage as far as possible. He doesn't know whether the Evian conference will open the gates of other countries to Jewish immigration. But like Greenbaum, who later became chair of the Jewish Agency Rescue Committee, and Asishkin, he fears that at this time the conference is liable to cause immense harm to Eretz Yisrael and Zionism.
The fiercely undemocratic Hindu supremacist President of India, Narendra Modi, will address a joint session of the U.S. Congress. Idris Ahmad comments, "It's worth recalling that until 2014, Modi wasn't even allowed to enter the U.S., and officials refused to meet him because of his complicity in the 2002 Gujarat massacre. Now he is Putin's biggest enabler, and POTUS is sending a terrible message." The claim that Modi is a Putin enabler is no hyperbole. After the invasion last year of Ukraine, its government called for countries to stop buying Russian oil. But according to an article on oilprice.com on June 9th, Russian oil accounted for a massive 42% of all Indian crude imports, compared to negligible volumes India had imported before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. That's our program for today. I'm Stanley Heller for the Struggle Video News.